It was 5:30 p.m. on a Wednesday evening. Dad drove in through the gate looking all worked up and moody. Mom wasn't home yet from work, and so Dad just walked past Sarah, Casimir, and I into his room. I made way to the kitchen, and in less than 20 minutes, his supper was ready. All efforts to get him take dinner proved futile, as he never said a word to all three of us. The look on the faces of my siblings was not encouraging at all. At some point they cried, and at the other point they tried calling Mom, whose number became switched off after several attempts to reach her. I decided to send Casimir to Dad's room to see if Dad would talk to him, being that he's the man of the house. But in less than 10 minutes, Casimir came back to the sitting room saying Dad wants to be left alone. This unusual behavior really appeared strange to us, owing to the fact that our parents always looked forward to being with us after close of work each day. We were a happy family. Even our neighbors complimented Mom and Dad on a daily basis. In church we were the perfect family. In our school my siblings and I were always addressed as lucky children, as Mom and Dad were always the couple of the day for every end of term activity and end of year's party. And so this recent silence by Dad was really telling hard on us. At this point in time, Sarah and Casimir were already in tears. I tried so hard to pet them, but for every 5 minutes I pet them, I cried for the next 10 minutes. It wasn't long before we heard the honk of Mom's car, and all three of us rushed out to the gate, but we received the shock of our lives when Mom reacted the same way as her husband. She said nothing to us as she walked straight to her bedroom. She didn't even carry Sarah, who happens to be the youngest of us. At this point Sarah and Casimir increased the frequency of their weeping. I used my hands to cover their mouths so as not to invite our neighbors into our home. I led them into their separate rooms, but none could sleep. And so I took them to my room and I put them to bed. While they slept, I walked straight to the kitchen to tidy up. As I cleared the plates my siblings used in eating, my mind traveled far and wide. I picked up my phone and placed a call to my maternal grandmother. "Hello Granny, how do you do?" "I'm pretty well, my dear. Hope your parents and my babies are fine." "Yes Grandma, everyone is fine." I quickly hung up on Grandma. I wasn't actually missing her, but I wanted to know if she was alive. Probably her death was the reason why my parents were all moody and with teary eyes. After hearing Grandma's voice, I concluded that my parents' current state had nothing to do with our extended family. My paternal grandparents were long dead and my maternal grandmom just spoke to me a while ago. So what then could be the reason for their teary eyes and silence? I walked to sitting room and switched on the television. I tuned to a Nigerian station, waiting to hear the crash of a plane and probably the list of persons who boarded the plane. When I found none, I tuned into CNN, but I found nothing again. Which means our relatives home and abroad were actually safe, so why the mutual moodiness? I switched off the television and sat on the tiled floor. I had never seen my parents in this state, and so I knew that whatever must have kept them like this must be very serious. I quickly sat up and prayed for my parents. I was just 10 years of age. While I sat on the floor, I just muttered some things to God, and I knew He understood every bit of all I said. Mom had told us during our night devotion the previous day that God loves little children. And so I told God that since He loves me, that I loved Him too, but I needed Him to stop my parents from crying. Did God really stop my parents from crying? When I perceived I had prayed enough, I wiped my eyes with the hem of my nightgown and climbed upstairs to join my siblings. But sleep was very far from me. I just sat still and watched my siblings while they slept. I sat on my reading chair, with my jaw buried in my hands. Few minutes later, I heard sounds from Mom and Dad's room. Their voices were so low that I barely heard what they said, but I noticed Mom was weeping uncontrollably. Amidst her sobs, all I managed to hear was "Father, why?" Her biological father was long dead, and so it dawned on me that she was referring to God. I wonder what God had done to my parents that He made them weep this way, and even Mom questioned Him. I opened the door of my room and tiptoed through the stairs to my parents' room. I eavesdropped, and my dad was just screaming "H-E-Y, Jesus." This made me confused the more. While Mom questioned him, Dad called out to him as if he was physically present with them. I walked back upstairs to join my siblings in my room. I forced myself to sleep because we would be going to school the next day and I couldn't afford to sleep in class. "Zina, wake up, it's time for devotion." I recognized that voice. It was Mom's. Though it was so faint, but I've gotten used to her that I could hear the meditations of her heart even while she was mute. We had this connection together, reason being that I'm the eldest child. She's always told us that she had no favorite amongst the three of us, but my siblings have always doubted her because of how dear she treats me. I quickly woke Casimir and Sarah and we headed for the sitting room. Mom's eyes were swollen, Dad's eyes were red as though he was bleeding through his eyes. My siblings and I assembled and sat still. They owed us explanations. But instead we just conducted our morning devotion and everybody got prepared for school and work respectively. I opened my mouth to speak after devotion, but found no words. Why have they chosen to keep us in the dark? Don't they both owe us explanations owing to their behaviors the previous day? I asked no one in particular as I bathed Sarah. My siblings and I dressed up for school in silence. We headed for the dining room, had our breakfast, and Dad drove us to school in silence. I told my siblings not to look like what they went through the previous night so as not to allow questions from our different teachers. They promised to behave themselves and we left for our various classes. As I sat in class, the event of the previous day came flashing in my head. From Dad's arrival to Mom's arrival, then to their deep groanings at midnight, and then their feigning ignorance during devotion and their utmost silence during breakfast. I begged God not to allow my parents separate. I've heard and seen children living with either of their parents and I knew how tough it was for them. I couldn't imagine living with my dad without my mom or living with Mom while Dad was away forever. I begged God to keep them together as I was still tender to experience separation of any kind. I was just 10 and in my last class in primary school. While in class I was absent-minded all through. I stared at Auntie Teresa but I heard nothing though her lips were moving. Auntie Teresa happened to be my form teacher and my social studies teacher. On this very day, she had dressed like my mom and the sight of her made my mind travel far and wide. I imagined it was my mom who was taking us on social studies, but when I remembered that Auntie Teresa had once mentioned to another teacher that she was separated from her husband, I began to bind and cast every spirit of separation. By the time I had stopped imagining, Auntie Teresa had cleaned the whiteboard 3 times and I had nothing on my note. The family was the day's topic. In no distant time, we went on break but I just sat on my chair and had lunch. My class captain, Francis, walked up to me to ask what the problem was, but I had to lie as Mom had warned us not to take our family's dispute outside the walls of our sitting room. I told him I was pretty much fine and forced a fake smile. I asked him for his social studies notes so as to enable me update mine. All through the day, I kept to myself and waited earnestly for school to dismiss. In no distant time, dismissal bell was rung. I hurriedly packed my books into my bag and headed for Casimir's and Sarah's class. The three of us headed for the school's gate, and for once in a long time, we were taken home by our driver. My countenance fell again. Casimir, Sarah, and I said nothing to each other as our driver drove us home, and we knew better than asking him about our parents. In no distant time we drove through our gate. Each one of us rushed to the door and was greeted by Mom. Her countenance hasn't changed, but I noticed something. Our belongings were being packed into traveling bags as though we were packing out of our home. All efforts to get Mom talk to us proved abortive as she promised us a bright future. Mom, don't you think you owe us some explanations? No, Casimir, what Dad and I are going through is too big for your consumption. We love you and we want the best for you and your siblings. Just trust us enough to lead you by the hand. All that didn't go down well with me. Yes, we were very little, but not so little to understand what Mom was going through. Even if she didn't want to involve all three of us, I was the eldest and her favorite too. I should be carried along, or so I thought. Mom served us lunch as usual and we all retired to our separate rooms. Days turned into weeks and our belongings were still being packed, and neither Mom nor Dad told us if we were either relocating or actually leaving the country. I made up my mind not to talk to Mom anymore since she didn't want to relate the problem to us. We lived in the same house, but we had become far apart. What held us together was just our morning and night devotions. Casimir and Sarah, on the other hand, began acting strange. I noticed they stopped greeting our parents, and little Sarah stopped talking to Mom too. Her excuse was, "If she doesn't talk to me, why should I talk to her?" I scolded her to stop such attitude as I didn't want her to grow with it. Our parents brought us up in the way of the Lord, and so keeping malice was not even an option. Dad came home in no distant time, still weary and moody. I gave a stern look to my siblings and that prompted them to greet him. He came home together with our family friend, Uncle Samson. Uncle Samson has been a good friend to Mom and Dad ever since I got to know what was good and bad, but just as I predicted, my siblings and I were sent to our rooms to enable Mom and Dad have a heart-to-heart discussion with Uncle Samson. We grumbled our way up the stairs and neither of us ever thought of eavesdropping for the fear of being flogged by Father. Few hours later, I heard Mom call out to me and I ran as fast as my legs could carry me down the stairs, and there was Uncle Sam offering me a brown envelope. I didn't need a soothsayer to tell me there was money in there. But why should Uncle Sam give me such money? Or have my parents lost their jobs? Even if they did, I shouldn't be the one receiving the money when Mom was present. I maintained my cool and gave a corner eye look to my mom, and from the look in her eyes, she encouraged me to receive it. I thanked Uncle Sam as I have been taught, and we bade him farewell. The next day was Sunday, the most important day in the home of the Adaropos. Every one of us looked forward to Sunday, as it was either Dad was ministering or Mom was leading the choristers in the day's special anthem, or even both. My siblings and I looked forward to Sunday as it made us the most envied kids at our local church. Not every child lived with both parents, and even the ones that do, don't have them function in the Lord's vineyard. Owing to Mom and Dad's engagements in the church, they encouraged us to live exemplary lives both at church and in all places. But this Sunday seemed so different in the sense that Mom asked me to share the money Uncle Sam had given us into 3 equal parts. When I did that, she asked me to get a 1/10 of everyone and replace it in 3 different envelopes. Sarah, Casimir, and I were going to pay our tithe for the first time today. Mom and Dad explained to us the biblical principles of giving to God what He gave to us, saying that all good and perfect gift comes from God. Dad and Mom wore a matching traditional outfit, while Sarah and I wore a mint green floral dress with a peach shoe to match. Casimir, on the other hand, wore a mint green cashmere material and a pair of pastoral black shoes to match. As we approached the church premises, all eyes were on us, and I muttered to myself, if only these people knew that our parents were having a hard time and they weren't communicating to nobody, they wouldn't wish to be like us one bit. Good morning, sir. How are you today? By His special grace, I'm bouncing in the Lord. You ain't looking bad, sir. Thank you, Sister Titi. God bless you. Sister Titi had a habit of greeting and complimenting my dad whenever she sees him, and she left my siblings, especially me, with no option other than she was lusting after our father. I mean, why doesn't she greet and compliment Mom or any of the children? Why must it be only Daddy? The funniest thing was that Mom saw nothing wrong in her behavior. I eyed Sister Titi and walked past her to the church auditorium. I had enough problems to deal with it at home, and Sister Titi was not even near the least important. All through the service, I sat still and quiet as I watched my own father preach today's sermon. There's this feeling of satisfaction I always get when Daddy is on pulpit. The awaited time for tithe offering came through, and the moderator announced, "If you have your tithe, please step forward." It was not the first Sunday of the month, and so not many people came out to offer their tithes to God. Just when he was about to take away the box, there came my siblings and I in our glorious apparel, walking forward to the altar to offer our tithes. I could imagine the reaction of members of the congregation as we walked graciously to the altar. The service ended in no distant time, but as usual Mom and Dad had series of people waiting to see them after service, and so my siblings and I just waited within the church premises. It was while we waited that I met Jerry. Jerry is Evangelist Solomon's son, but he was 2 years older than myself, and he was already in secondary school while I was yet to write my common entrance examination for my supposed school of choice the next day. Jerry made my day with all his gist about the boarding school, and immediately I fell in love with the boarding school. I made up my mind to attend a boarding school. But how was I supposed to bring my parents to agree to this, seeing the current situation in our home? It was either boarding school or nothing. My mind was made up, and that was final. 2 hours later, my parents and Jerry's parents were ready to leave for home. I bade Jerry goodbye from the car's window as Daddy drove away. As we sat on the dining table to eat, Mom and Dad kept stealing glances at each other, and I knew better than interrupting that quiet moment. Suddenly, Daddy coughed and said he had something to tell us. I immediately stopped eating, as I've been waiting for this moment. It is a good thing to serve in the Lord's vineyard. Several weeks back, your mom and I came back home separately with burdens too heavy for us to utter. We are sorry for keeping you all in the dark, but as it stands now, we have decided that we tell you the situation of things. The Lord is sending us into full-time ministry, and by this I mean that we are both resigning from our jobs to face the ministry squarely in another state, and that means we are leaving this house. It's a good thing that Zina will be writing her common entrance examination tomorrow, so it would be easier for us to get her admitted in a new school. Casimir and Sarah will also get to change their schools respectively. We urge you to please bear with us and understand that this is beyond our control. Before Daddy could end his speech, Casimir and Sarah were already in tears. All efforts to get them together proved futile. Their major concern were their friends at school and church respectively. I didn't cry, not because I liked the situation at hand, but because I had plans of leaving for the boarding school. So while my parents and siblings were in their new station, I would be in the boarding school with new set of friends. I presented my matter before my parents. I told them about going to the boarding school, and without wasting time, they agreed, and plans to write another entrance examination was put into place. My siblings wore a long face throughout the night while I fantasized about my life in the boarding school. I couldn't wait to experience all that Jerry said to me while we were in church. I painted pictures of how I was going to behave in the boarding school. I was still lost in my world of fantasy when I slept off. Morning came so quickly and I dressed up for my entrance examination. Do I really have to write this examination, reason being that I would be going to a boarding school? Zina, do not put all your eggs in one basket. What if you don't pass the boarding school's entrance examination? But Mom, you've always taught us to be optimistic about life, why then? Zina, will you keep quiet and get into the car? I grudgingly walked into the car and Mom drove us to school. She dropped my siblings off and we headed for the entrance venue. I said nothing to her as she drove and she said nothing to me either. We got to my international group of schools and before we alighted, Mom held my hands and prayed for me. She led me to the class for my exam while she waited outside the school's premises for me. The examination was quite simple as I finished 30 minutes before time. As I sat back to cross-check my work, I looked beside me and saw a girl in tears. She explained that she didn't know what to write and that she needed my help. Mom had always talked to us about examination malpractice of any kind. In fact, she mentioned it while she was praying for me this morning. I didn't want to sin against God by indulging in examination malpractice, but the tears of this girl moved me and I remembered that Mom has always taught us to be good to people, and so I decided to help her. I opened my work for her to copy and in no distant time, she was done. I quickly went to our invigilator and submitted my script, and right in my very before my script was torn in shreds. The invigilator accused me of examination malpractice. All efforts to explain myself failed as he gave me a fresh script. As I sat down to start afresh, I was already psychologically weak. I tried my best to scribble some things on my script, but in no distant time the bell was rung. My script was collected from me and I broke down in tears. What was I supposed to tell Mom? I made up my mind I wasn't going to disclose what had happened to anybody, not even Mom. I wiped my tears and headed for the gate. Zina, how was your exams? It was fine, Mom, God be praised. I hope you didn't indulge in examination malpractice. At the mention of that word, my heart skipped a beat and I coughed as though I was choking. She quickly got me water and we got into the car. Several weeks after, the boarding school's entrance examination was fixed and I vowed to give my best. The experience at my international group of schools came knocking and I dismissed it with a song of praise. As usual, Mom drove me again to the venue of my entrance examination. I got into the class and sat down quietly, not talking to any friend or foe. I gave my shots and in 2 hours' time I was out of the hall. This particular exam was not as easy as the first entrance examination, and so right from the hall I was scared for myself already, reason being that the result of the first entrance examination had come a day before and I scored 50 out of 400. I couldn't bring myself to explain to my parents what transpired in the examination hall, and so I just kept my cool and prayed to God to help my dreams of going to a boarding school come to pass. Did my dreams come to pass? 2 weeks after my boarding school entrance examination, I had already told everyone who cared to hear that I would be leaving for boarding school come the next academic session. As at this time, I hadn't even seen my entrance results, then not to talk of going for interview nor receiving admission letter. I don't know if it was fate, but whichever way, I was calling forth those things that are not as though they were, and my admission into the boarding school was paramount. And just like a miracle, Dad received a text message inviting Mississippi Zina Folklore Ruth Aderopo for her interview. Though we hadn't seen the entrance results, but the fact that I was invited for the interview means I passed the entrance examinations. The interview went smoothly and preparations to go to boarding school commenced with immediate effect. As Mom prepared me for school, she also prepared our luggage to move to our new station. Casimir and Sarah have come to accept our new fate. Besides, what could they do? Absolutely nothing. 3 weeks later, we vacated our 3-bedroom apartment in the heart of Lagos and we relocated to the heart of Ibadan. Dad and Mom started a new church with immediate effect, and my siblings and I were addressed as OMO pastor.